All the long day's weariness is done. I'm free at last to do just as I will. Take up my pipe, admire the setting sun, practice the art of simply sitting still. Thank God I have this briar bowl to fill. I leave the world with all its hopeless hype, its pressures, and its ever-ringing till, and let it go in smoke rings from my pipe. The hustle and the bustle, these I shun. The tasks that trouble and the cares that kill, the false idea that there's a race to run, the pushing of that weary stone uphill, the wretched iPhone's all-insistent trill, whingers and whiners, each with their own gripe. I pack them in tobacco leaves until they're blown away in smoke rings from my pipe. And then, at last, my real work is begun. My chance to chant, to exercise the skill of summoning the muses one by one to meet me in their temple. Touch my quill. I have a pen, but quills are better still. And when the soul is full, the time is ripe. Kindle the fire of poetry that will breathe and expand like smoke rings from my pipe. Prince, I have done with grinding at the mill. These petty, pelting tyrants aren't my type. So lift me up and set me on a hill, a free man blowing smoke rings from his pipe.
Welcome to the Imagination Redeemed podcast, where we follow the great stories further up and further in pursuit of the life of Christ.
Beautiful. Malcolm Guite, thank you for sharing that. I'm Brian Brown with Malcolm and Matthew Clark. We are here to talk about smoke rings from our pipes. We have been spending the summer talking about different topics related to ordinary time and entering into the work of God and the relationship between his work and ours. And we needed a moment of stillness in the middle of that. And so we thought we would go to someone who we hoped against hope might also need a moment of stillness in his busy life and busy projects. And perhaps, gentlemen, it would be best to start with a few logistics. We're going to talk about stillness and the art of stillness and how pipe smoking is a case study in it. But I feel we should also start by what we are smoking and what we are smoking it in.
Ah, right. Very good. So I'm smoking some Kendal Black Cherry, which is a dark Cavendish with a cherry flavor. Kendal is the place, I mean, obviously it's not grown in England, but it's mixed in England. Kendal is the little place in the Lake District, which is right at the heart of the Lake District where Wordsworth and Coleridge often gathered. Coleridge was a pipe smoker, not Wordsworth, but he was often sort of dipping into ale houses and pot houses, as they were called then, not in the American sense of the word pot, but a pot as a vessel from which you drank. And anyway, so I quite like smoking a tobacco which has some association with the Lake District. I'm a great fan of Peterson pipes. I have a variety of them. This is, I just took it out for special occasion. This is a quite unusual Peterson. There's apart from Peterson's own shop on Grafton Street, there's another very old tobacconist on Grafton Street that's been there for a couple of 100 years. And they had their 150th anniversary, and they commissioned Peterson to make a set of 150 pipes to commission. And this, if you can't really see it, but on the silver band has quite a nice sort of Celtic kind of inlay sort of effect on it. It's very, very faint there now.
Beautiful.
So I happened to come across one of these, and I pushed out the boat and bought it because I like pipes that have a bit of history and a story to tell. And it's quite unusual having the amber stem as well. That's quite nice. I feel that, well, in fact, I don't know if it was pearl or amber. I mean, somewhere point in the Lord of the Rings, the hobbits are given by Theoden or somebody a really beautiful pair of pipes. And I think they're made by the elves. So I think this is the nearest I get to a kind of at least a quasi-elven pipe.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful.
All right. Top that, Clark.
This is not a competition. I don't want to.
Sorry. I should have got out a very ordinary one, but I don't smoke this one very often, so it's actually quite nice.
Well, this pipe is. People have given me pipes over the year. I think I've smoked this pipe with you, Malcolm, at the last Oxbridge, maybe.
Oh, great! Yeah, I love when you're given pipes. There has to be eventually, if you get to know him at all, there'll be a whole section of your pipe rack called Gifts from Jerry Root. Because Jerry Root, the great Lewis scholar, is such a good man. But he's a man of such generous heart that I didn't know this when I first met him, that it's really dangerous to admire anything that he has. You know, I regard it as a place, that's a beautiful pipe. Here, it's yours. He immediately gives away anything you admire. I have a couple of very fine pipes from Jerry.
Well, I need to meet him.
You definitely do.
Yeah, we need to become friends.
I've heard a lot about him, but this pipe actually, it was my first pipe and is my main pipe, and it was my granddad's pipe. My granddad.
Oh, that's really good. You have topped me now. That's great.
Yeah. It was my mom. I never got to meet either one of my grandfathers. They both died before I was born, and I was going through my granddad's kind of dressing room one time years ago, and I hadn't actually told anybody that I was smoking a pipe or looking for one to smoke, but I found this in a drawer, and I asked my grandmother if I could have it, and she said, yeah, sure. So I don't know what it is. It says Royal Scot on the side, and I asked my tobacconist friend, John David Cole, who runs the Country Squire back.
You put me in touch with the Country Squire. That's a great outlet, yeah.
And I don't know that he ever really got a good lead on it, but it's a just kind of a simple briar pipe, but I love it. Connects me to I like having things that connect me to people, and not having
it's
ever
got a
gotten
nice long shank of briar itself. Hold it up again. That's quite a good thing. If you hear that much briar before you get to the vulcanite stem, that shows you how big a block of briar they were carving, because that's not stuck on. That's all one piece. So that's quite a luxury item to have that much briar on the stem.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. That's wonderful. That's encouraging. Well, I love it. And the tobacco, so about 3 or 4 years ago, it was my birthday, and my brother Sam went down to the Country Squire, and he got a custom blend made for me. I live with my brother. I've lived with him for about 10 or 11 years now, and he's a very funny guy. And so he handed me this for my birthday. I don't know if you can see. This is my own personal pipe tobacco blend called Old Squirrel Butt. So I'm smoking the very last of Old Squirrel, my last batch of Old Squirrel Butt today with you guys. Hope you feel
fantastic.
honored.
I do, yeah. I wish at some point the technology of the internet will allow us to savor each other's tobacco. You know, there'll be on Zoom, there'll be a share fumes button.
Don't you just wish you could smell some Old Squirrel Butt right now?
Well, I dearly hope not, because when one likes to, first of all, I don't know how often I'd want to smell Matthew's fumes, but second of all, I wouldn't want to lose yet another value of the face-to-face.
Oh, no, absolutely. No, this is a pale simulacrum.
Right.
What we really need, which is to bring
Yes.
the three of us together.
Well, I'm smoking this is a Larsen from Copenhagen.
Oh, yeah, very nice Danish pipes, yeah.
Yeah, this was a gift as well. 2-3 years ago, I had completely burned out. I was having all kinds of health issues from prolonged stress and working too hard. And I had 2 different friends. One was one of my high school mentors, and then one was a dear friend from here in Colorado, both of whom took it upon themselves to introduce me to a life of improved stillness by getting me into pipe smoking. And this was a gift from one of them. And I'm smoking Country Squire's Black and Tan blend, which is a Burley Cavendish. So Matthew, that's your fault as well.
Oh, excellent. Good.
Well, gentlemen, perhaps we should start with just the basic question. Why is stillness a desirable thing? We live a very fast-paced life. On some level, that might seem an obvious question, but as something to cultivate as opposed to simply wish for, why is it a desirable thing?
Well, I mean, there are many ways you could enter that. There's a fine phrase in one of T.S. Eliot's poems where he talks about being at the still point of the turning world. And that's a very helpful metaphor. If things are whirling around, they're whirling around some kind of center, which is still. This is why the pole star, the North Star, was deemed to be so important, because the other stars sort of revolved around it. So finding a still point doesn't necessarily mean retreating to a periphery. It may be a kind of center. The other thing, which is from another tradition, but in the Eastern traditions of meditation and contemplation, and particularly in the sort of Zen and Buddhist sayings, there's always a very nice analogy they use of how if you keep stirring water that's already muddy, it just gets muddier. You can't clear it by stirring it, but if you leave it, eventually the mud settles and the water becomes clear. So there is some kind of, those two metaphors between them would suggest that stillness has something to do with finding a center, and it has something to do with clarity. And of course, the third, which caps both of those, the poetic and the Zen analogy, is, of course, the scripture, and specifically the verse in the Psalms that says, "Be still and know that I am God." Or again, in the story of Elijah, going off at Elijah is definitely, if you read the book, totally suffering from burnout. It's like completely finished, and he wants to die and everything, and he goes, and then there's a massive storm and there's all these things, but God, the voice of God was not in the storm, and it wasn't in the thunder, but then, then it wasn't in the earthquake, and then there came a still small voice. And there's something about hearing God in the stillness, I think.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was Eliot, because I couldn't remember where the still point. And then there's another poem, and Malcolm, you need to help me figure out, where he talks about the center will not hold.
That's Yeats. So that's Yeats's extraordinary prophetic poem, The Second Coming, where he says, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world." I feel like we're there now. And he says, about that time, this wouldn't be true of all times, but he says, "The best lack all conviction, whilst the worst are full of passionate intensity," So that fear that if the center cannot hold, then mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. He's partly thinking, I think he's thinking about, in political terms, about a center and the need for a center, and that he's writing out of the distress. The Irish Civil War has not yet happened, but he can see it coming, just as he could see the first. That was written before both the First World War and the Irish Civil War, but he could see it coming. And both of those are crises arising from the failure of the center to hold.
I want to tug on that thread for a moment. What is the virtue of stillness in the face of something like that, whether it's impending disaster that you see coming, or that might be coming, or that you may feel is all around you? What's the virtue of stillness in that context, as opposed to springing into action on the one hand, or just sort of crying out at the world and at perhaps the other end of the spectrum?
Well, maybe springing into action, Napoleon had a phrase, if he was ever accused of retreat, he would say, "Recueillez pour mieux sortir." So fall back in order better to advance. And there's something to be said. I mean, I don't think there's a necessary choice to be made or contradiction between stillness and action. But I think action often goes awry if it's not preceded by stillness. So another book that would be very pertinent to our things if we suddenly pulled it off the shelf is the classic collection of pieces by Thomas Merton, the monk of Gethsemane in Louisville, Kentucky, great American Cistercian monk. He wrote a collection called Contemplation in a World of Action. That's not contemplation against a world of action. It's contemplation in a world of action. So I don't think, obviously some people are called to a life of complete stillness and prayer and contemplation, and we benefit from their doing that. They do that on our behalf. But I think particularly people whose life involves action of one kind or another, whether it's social action or political action or, Matthew, musical and literary action, or my literary, we are doing things in the world, but we have to do them. We mustn't be on the outside of the spinning world, just whirled around and round endlessly. We have to find the still point before we then move out into the motion.
Yeah, this is, I was talking a couple of weeks ago with Jonathan Rogers, another Rabbit Room guy, and we're both big fans of Joseph Pieper.
Oh, yeah.
And we're talking about his idea of contemplation and that we are pilgrims, that what a human is a pilgrim on a pilgrimage of beholding.
Yeah.
But that how hard it is to be constantly choosing to be still, to contemplate. Think of that other psalm that talks about what I desire more than anything else is to behold your beauty, to wait on you in your temple and contemplate before you. And then that Psalm 46, the be still, and everything is crazy in that psalm. It's just the sort of surrounding circumstance for the psalmist is bananas.
Yeah.
And he's saying, but I've got to somehow find a way to get back in touch with what is ultimately real.
Yeah.
The realest, truest thing.
We were mentioning Yeats's poem. One of his finest poems, or most famous poems, of course, is The Lake Isle of Innisfree. And everybody assumes that he was on this beautiful lake island in this utterly contemplative still space writing a gorgeous poem, That's great for Yeats, I'm stuck commuting. But in fact, he was in London and he was walking down this very busy street with everybody going past him, and he stopped in there was a little jeweler's shop with a display in the window, and somebody had set up like a shell with a little fountain going up in it. And seeing the fountain made him then remember the Lake Isle of Innisfree. And then he says, the poem is actually saying it's when I'm out on the streets that I hear lake water lapping. And he says, I hear it in the deep heart's core. So somehow his time in places where he has, he says he's tried treading the pavements grey. But then I hear lake water lapping. I hear it in the deep heart's core. And you have to thank Yeats just for the phrase, the deep heart's core. I mean,
Beautiful.
Great phrase maker. Obviously, the center cannot hold is a phrase that's been taken from his poem and used endlessly. And I remember once I had a conversation with the great Irish poet Seamus Heaney, who's, I think, inherits Yeats' mantle in every respect and entirely sits well on his shoulders. And he said he thought that it's best what poetry offered. It might not even be the whole poem that you remember. He said poetry offers phrases that feed the soul. And, the center cannot hold, and by its contrary, its contrast, the deep heart's core are both phrases that feed the soul that we draw from Yeats.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that at some point. That really stuck with me, that idea of phrases.
And you don't know what the phrases are.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be the phrase that you thought was the best phrase in your poem.
Right. Yeah, that is always surprising.
Yeah,
Well, because that's part of the idea of like when you're making, you're always participating in a reality larger than yourself. So how
absolutely.
things will always mean more than you could ever mean for them to mean.
Yeah, well, I always sometimes think, that the only thing that gives me the temerity to call myself a poet is the conviction that all the words I use are older and wiser than I am. They're long, old words. They know things I don't know. And if I set them in a particular order, I kind of overhear their conversation and, a poem may emerge, but it's from them rather than from me.
Mm.
Just since we've been quoting Yeats twice, and we're talking about pipes, I've just reached it over for my pipe. This was the first gift I ever had from the great Jerry Reed.
Ah,
So going back to what I told you about the long stem. So we were in Grantchester Meadows in Cambridge, and he'd brought a group of people over from the kilns in Oxford, and I'd been asked if I would take them around Cambridge and show them the C.S. Lewis's Cambridge as opposed to C.S. Lewis's Oxford. Obviously, he was much happier in Cambridge than he was in Oxford, goes without saying. But so we walked out from Cambridge and we came to Grantchester Meadows, which is rich in poetic associations and the subject of a great poem by Reed. And they all started getting out their pipes and smoking. And I felt in my pocket I didn't have a pipe. I thought, God, this is terrible. So Jerry Reed said, don't worry, I've got a spare. So he gets this pipe out, this astonishing pipe, right? And he passes it over to me and I look at it. I said, that's a pre-Republic Peterson. And he says, how do you know that? I said, well, I'm kind of nerdily into Petersons. And he said, well, it is, yeah, so enjoy it. So I filled this great, huge bowl, which is like a whole, full evening. And we sat and talked. And I started this little game with him. I said, let's try and think about all the great Irish poetry that's been written since this pipe was made in Dublin, in the 20s. So we started quoting Yeats, and then we quoting Kavanagh, and, so we finished doing all this stuff. And at the end of and then we quoted probably the very Yeats poetry. So I said, just think, somebody was reading that poetry while they were smoking this pipe when that poetry was only just out. So at the end of the session, I reverently and gently gave him back the pipe and said it was an honor to smoke that. And he says, no, it's yours. And I said, no, you can't do that. There's my first. He said, no. The fact that you knew what it was and that you thought of reciting the poetry means it's your pipe. So I said to him, look, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'll keep this pipe, well into my dotage or even my anecdotage, but I'll at some point I will meet some younger man who's into pipe smoking and he will get this pipe. The pipe, it's like the wand choosing the wizard. Like the pipe will show me who that person is. And I will give him this pipe together with the stories and it'll pass on that way.
That's the way to do it. That's so great.
So you just alluded to something that I think is very important, which is in the space of one story, you hit past and future. We spoke earlier about, be still in the scriptures, but something that's said even more often than be still in the scriptures is remember. What is, it feels to me like when you are still, you have a great store of remembrance to pull from, both in the biblical sense and in the more modern sense of the word. I think a lot of our listeners could be forgiven for listening and thinking, oh, if only I knew all those things, if only I had an encyclopedic knowledge of poetry, if only I were a great film buff, if only I. For, it's sort of a question for both of you, but I particularly want to hear your answer, Malcolm. For that person who's almost afraid to be alone with his thoughts because he doesn't want to face them or just wonders if there's even going to be anything there. Where does remembering fit in to stillness?
Well, I think stillness is certainly the time and place for remembering. It allows memory to rise to the surface rather than being pushed aside by events. And that's why a lot of people are afraid of stillness, because they're not sure what will come. And we all have difficult memories. And we tend to suppress precisely the memories of those times when we've made fools of ourselves or said the wrong thing or hurt somebody we love. Or, do you know what I mean? So you have to be prepared for those to come, and you have to be, that's why being still in the presence of God is incredibly helpful, because God already knows, as it were. God sees in the present the things that are in the past for us. He's like they're eternally present to him. So we can give them to him. In fact, confession, in whatever form you take it, I mean, I'm an Anglican, so I take it in quite a liturgical form, and I actually think making real confession to an actual priest is occasionally helpful. But the point being, if you look back at the times that now come to your memory and you're still, of where you screwed up in various ways, or you felt, if you really think about where you went wrong while you were in the midst of that sin, whatever it was, basically at that time you were forgetting God. If you'd remembered God, you wouldn't have done that, right? So when the memory comes in the present stillness, you have a chance to remember God as well, in God being present in that. Do you know what I mean? And that actually leads to a healing of the memories. It leads to the characteristically and beautiful Christian experience of forgiveness. In fact, Karl Barth, in his chapter on the forgiveness of sins in Dogmatics in Outline, the opening sentence of that chapter is brilliant. It just says, when a Christian looks at his past, he is looking at the forgiveness of sins. Amazing. It's great. So first is not to be afraid of the difficult memories as they come, because you remember them now in a presence. So there's that. But then when you've dealt with those, actually other things can come, and you find your mind is much fuller than you thought. You don't think you remember things, but in fact you do. I mean, I take the view that actually everything that goes into our heads remains there. It's just a question of how we access it. And some people have easier channels or habits of access than others, but everybody can improve that. Everybody can try and recall. Lots of people who've found themselves in captivity have discovered this, that they can access books they read ages ago. They just have to wait in the stillness of the prison cell until it comes to them, and then they've got it. So there are initial things that we fear. We have to overcome those fears, but then we do. But the other thing, memory is a paradox, because obviously remembrance is remembrance of things past. The great novel of Marcel Proust, À la recherche de temps perdu, in search of lost times. So on the one hand, you're remembering something in the past, but on the other hand, your act of remembering that past thing is itself in the present. And therefore, the past memory, even though the occasion of the memory is past, the memory comes into the present and allows some kind of access and, possibility and potential, because it's present for you now. So going back to T.S. Eliot, there's a very great phrase. He has an essay called Tradition and the Individual Talent, which is about how do you become an original writer when you're at the tail end of a massive tradition? How do you not just become a Milton wannabe or whatever? And that's an immensely difficult artistic question. But anyway, in this essay, he says a poet must be conscious not only of the pastness of the past, but of, and this is his exact phrase, the present moment of the past. The present moment of the past. Now, the word moment is not idly chosen by Eliot there. I mean, he could have said the present instant or minute, and that would have given it only a temporal meaning. But of course, moment is a remarkable word, because moment also means importance. This is a matter of some moment. But the reason, the hidden, the forgotten metaphor in the word moment, when I say this is a matter of great moment, is a reference back to the word momentum. It's about the weight and push. It's about when something, it's like that Newtonian cat's cradle where the ball at the end hits and then the other ones don't move, but a force is being transmitted through them. The little one out the end does that. That's momentum. And one of the things that, if we don't acknowledge the moment or the momentum of past events, whether it's in our own life or in the life of our nation. They act with force nevertheless, but it becomes a blind force. You know, we can see so many wars and crises arising out of a blow that was struck 300 years ago, still reverberating. Yeah. So the question of we're taking a moment, the moment that you're in now, to consider the moment of the past, and either to cleanse it or have it forgiven or to have it transfigured or transformed so that a strength from the past becomes available to you without the bitterness. None of those things can be done except in the present moment. I'll tell you the place that I think, if you want to think about why the present moment, in the Screwtape Letters, the 15th letter, which is the letter about time, and he says the human creatures live in time, but the enemy destines them for eternity. And, then he says, which mode of time is most like eternity? They think it's the future, but the future is completely unreal. It hasn't really happened. The past is frozen and no longer flows. And then I'm quoting Lewis directly now. But the present is all lit up with golden rays. The present is the point at which time touches eternity, which is one of those phrases of, you never forget once you read it. So to the person who's saying, I don't remember anything, the answer is be still and you'll be surprised how much you do remember.
I love that. It reminds me of the Blaise Pascal.
Oh, yes.
That all of man's problems come from not being able to sit alone.
Yeah, ne pas rester seul dans sa chambre. Yeah. That's a great saying. It's true, of course, properly speaking, all the world's troubles, if everybody just stayed in their room, but they'd have to eat sometime. He's right.
But you mentioned being afraid of what you might remember, being afraid of the thing. It's kind of that idea of, for me, I've been looking, really Ordinary Saints got me onto the idea in David Ford's book and then Roger Scruton's book, The Face of God, got me onto the idea of facing. And you and Bruce and Jack.
Oh, yes, being face to face. Yeah, the Ordinary Saints. Ordinary Saints. Confusingly, there are two books called Ordinary Saints. There's the collection of essays to which I think you maybe contribute for the Square Halo published.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a book of paintings by Bruce Herman with poems by me.
I'm thinking of y'all's project, and that got me onto the idea of facing. And then The Woman at the Well has been a big scene for me, a favorite scene.
Yeah.
The Lord kept me for many years. And that scene seems to be all about how difficult it is to face yourself unless you have first been faced in love by God. And so here comes this woman to the well in the middle of the day, and she has this encounter with Jesus. She has no idea that she's actually going to the well to meet God in the flesh.
Yeah,
she wouldn't have gotten out of bed if she had known that was going to happen, because she couldn't have imagined that it could be a good thing. But something happens in this moment between them that's you don't really. It's not described exactly what happens. You just see the result of what happens because she goes running back to the town singing. She has a new song, and the lover is singing. But some kind of stillness, I think, happened. There's a moment where she's about to turn and go, and in this momentum, this momentous moment.
I love Jesus's phrase at that point where he says, "If only you knew."
If only, yeah.
If only you knew who is asking you, you would ask him. You'd turn it all around, And, I often think that Jesus is walking around with us, standing beside us as we get ourselves into some stew, and going like, "If only you knew."
Yeah. But I think too that I love what you're saying about forgiveness, and one of the ideas I'm thinking a lot about in our culture, storylessness, decontextualization. We talk about disenchantment, but there's just kind of an overall decontextualization where I don't know where I came from. I don't know where I'm going. How can I possibly locate myself meaningfully in a fabric of narrative here and now? And I don't want to look at the past. I don't want to look at the generational things that have been passed down or the history of ideas that have got us to this point, because it's really kind of terrifying to face. But if I could face it with Jesus, then I can look back and I can see forgiveness and I can see possibility for the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah.
And then also thinking of time, we did this thing at an Anselm Imagination Redeemed conference some years ago. And I talked about time, but it got me thinking about there's a difference between mechanical time that has to do with this little thing you keep on your wrist that you feel like is controlling your life, or this thing you keep in your pocket, versus social time or moral time, where what you're discovering is that God has given this gift where there's time to see what kind of God is, where he can make a promise and then that promise has space to unfold so that you can learn, this is someone I can trust. This is someone I can put my life, my times in his hands.
Yeah.
That's who he is.
And then who comes in the fullness of time? No, that's very good. Of course, the Greek of the Greek New Testament has these two different words for time,
Mm-hmm.
chronos and kairos.
Mm-hmm.
The chronos is time as measured, if you like, by chronometers. It's that mechanical time.
Yeah.
Kairos is a time of crisis or meeting or opportunity. So sometimes you have to use a lot of English words. So in the authorized version, where he's weeping over Jerusalem, he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, half an hour. If only you had known the time of your visitation," it says in the authorized version. But in Greek, it just says, "If only you had known your kairos." So again, there's a sense in which what is kairos? Kairos is never in the past nor in the future. Its only possibility is to be now. So then you get later in Paul, behold, now is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. And somebody I think has written a book. There's a book called The Sacrament of the Present Moment. And I think there's a lot to be said. It's not that you shouldn't remember, and it's not that you shouldn't. It's necessary to anticipate the future. I mean, I needed to anticipate the future in order to be with you now. But those are functional things, whereas the sacramental thing is right now, the actual moment.
That reminds me of a day called today. Like in Hebrews, God has set a day and he's called it today. And today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. That there's some kind of moment being created for response, but it's this ongoing.
Yeah, well, it's again that this is the day the Lord has made.
Yeah.
We will rejoice and be glad in it. Tomorrow isn't the day that the Lord has made because he hasn't made it yet. And yesterday's the day the Lord has already made, but this is the day the Lord has made.
And don't miss it. Be here now and be present to it.
Okay, but I want to push back on this a little bit because we've talked about this idea that if that's true, in a sense, it's true of place as well as time. To
some degree.
I'm doing the dishes right now, so I have the opportunity to meet the great story, to enter into the great story in the kitchen sink. I think probably at least 3/4 of the people I know would hear that and immediately feel a sense of pressure. Oh dear, because you can accurately say that there's a sense of if my calling is to bring eternity, to participate in the work of Christ and bringing eternity and bringing the divine to this place, claiming this little moment, this little space and time for Christ. Oh my goodness, the pressure. So how does the insight you just provided, Malcolm, how does that translate to stillness?
Well, I think the very thing you said, oh my God, I've got to do this. This is part of our sort of, what they call the Protestant work ethic, isn't it? As opposed, I presume, to the Catholic play ethic. I don't know. But anyway, the thing is, we are very task-oriented. It's arguable that we've been made task-oriented and also filling every, fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run and all that. That's actually a product of not only the invention of clocks, but the sort of capitalist invention of the production line and all of those kinds of things, And it's ironic when we say, now I've got, there is a sense in which my vocation is to make myself utterly available to Christ so that Christ may, in some small way through me, be present in this moment. That's true. But that's not my work. That's his work. I have to be disponible, as the French say. I have to be available. And I should try sometimes consciously to make myself available. but I may be available to him anyway. I mean, like, he'll work with anybody. When he couldn't get Balaam to prophesy, he prophesied through Balaam's ass, So, like, he can work with difficult material.
Very resourceful.
Yeah, the main thing is that he gets, that it's him doing it. So I really think, like, thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. I don't think it's a big task and I don't even think you have to yourself be like uber conscious of the Christ moment, as it comes or something like that, and then make a quick note of it and write a book of theology about it later. I think you just have to be there, in returning and rest, as, the scripture says. So I would say as soon as you're beating yourself up about duty, you've already got locked into the circle of self. It may be self-reproving self, but it's still the self turned in on itself, as Augustine says. You drop that, and then you make this open gesture with your palms, which is really, here am I for you. And the for you bit means that God does his stuff. And as Paul says, his strength is made perfect in weakness. So, like, if you say you're in the course of your day, you've decided I'm going to set 10 minutes aside simply to sit and be still, with or without the aid of a pipe. If you immediately start, as it were, putting your hand on your pulse and taking your religious pulse, and temperature all the time, how's it going? Can I have a status report on this? Has there been any value added in the last 50 seconds? You've completely lost it. Just enjoy the pipe, enjoy the morning, listen to the bird song. Don't feel there has to be a product for Jesus out of that. Because Jesus is both the end and the beginning and the way, and his strength is made perfect in weakness. You can just know that you're with him. He is with you, and he will achieve what he wants in the world through you. But you don't have to be constantly sending back a status report on it.
There was a line in your opening poem, the ever-ringing till.
Yeah, the world with all its hopeless hype, its pressures, and its ever-ringing till.
And I've been thinking about the idea of gift economy in Isaiah 55, and you come you who have no money and buy, and how this is, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts, because I know that this way of living and thinking in the gift economy is so foreign to you. But I'm going to send my word down like rain and snow to water and make the world flourish, and my people will be endowed with beauty. And so just thinking about the idea of how there's this totally foreign economy that God is asking us to participate in, but we're so saturated in accomplishment and achievement and the ever-ringing till that it's really hard for us to sit still and actually believe in that other way of life, which is the life of the Trinity. Yeah. And I've been reading Sarah Clarkson's book, Reclaiming Quiet, and she talks so much about being a busy parent of, I think, 4 kids at this point. And she talked about how she is learning that difference between this thing that I have to accomplish, this quiet that I have to generate myself, versus a quiet that it already exists and is kept in God, and that I can visit that place. I can visit that other world in this world. And part of that is really to do with the theology of Sabbath, I think, as it says in Genesis, that on the 7th day God rests. Well, the 6 days are already over, so this is still the 7th day. There's an eternal Sabbath. So the Sabbath is something you don't make. It's something you enter into. So now let's talk about phrases that feed the soul. Yeah. You Americans have got one of the, still alive, thanks be to God, one of the great poets of our age, which is Wendell Berry. Yeah. And that collection of his This Is the Day, which is all the Sabbath poems, is written on Sabbaths. So there's a phrase in one of those early Sabbath poems which says, he's walking out to the woods, right, from off the field, where he's leaving his tasks and his cattle where they're lying down and all the jobs of the farm in Kentucky. He's walking into this little wood. And he says, once again, I enter, this is such a great phrase. He says, I enter the standing Sabbath of the trees. Now, obviously, there's a sense in which the trees are standing, and so that's their Sabbath is a standing Sabbath. But obviously standing means standing over, not being washed away. And he's actually riffing on
a phrase in Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, where he's discussing the difference between time and eternity. And he's trying to get across to you the idea that eternity is not infinity. It's not an infinite succession of separable moments, each to be won and lost and found. He says, this is exactly his phrase in the Latin of the text. He says, eternity is a nunc stans, a standing now, an eternal now, a now that's always available. And I think Wendell Berry is saying the trees are already in this Sabbath. God is already in this Sabbath. God is in this Sabbath, looking at the trees in this Sabbath. It is a standing Sabbath. It's like a standing order. It's always, and all I have to do is enter into the standing Sabbath of the trees.
Is that the same idea of like we have a standing meeting, like every Tuesday?
Yeah, exactly.
This thing, but I just have to show up for it.
It's a standing. It's standing and it's stand and withstand. Of course, is a famous phrase again in Paul taken up by Luther. But yeah, I love that idea that the trees are already keeping this perfect Sabbath. I just have to walk in there and enter the standing Sabbath of the trees.
That makes me think about my dad is a tree farmer, and so we have all this acreage of a lot of it's pine trees, a lot of it's hardwoods. We call it a hardwood stand, actually, or a pine stand. And so, we grew up, my dad was a really gung-ho deer hunter. But what I figured out later in life is that the reason he liked to go deer hunting is because it was a chance to go and sit completely still and quiet in the woods for hours and hours and hours, which was a bit much for me as a kid. I was too squirmy for that. But now I love it. I love to just go sit and be silent for 3 or 4 hours and just stare at and then talking about things you notice, it's really amazing. If you stare at the same patch of woods for 3 or 4 hours, you begin to get very tuned into every little movement. You see a bird over here and you notice everything. And all of a sudden, this thing that you might have scanned quickly past becomes so full of life.
Yeah. And of course, all the time you're noticing your trees, the trees or the woods or the movements, you are blessedly and mercifully not noticing yourself.
Yeah.
So one of the first things you have to get out of the way in silence is the self. And that's why it's so difficult, because the first thing that happens when you go into silence is all your junk comes to the surface. And you long for a distraction so you won't see your junk. And you just have to say, that is going to drift away. The stream is going to carry that down. And you have the streams. I don't think it was found very helpful. There's a guy called Robert Llewellyn he's died now, but I got to know him when I was a student, and he's a Christian priest. But he was actually the keeper of the shrine of Julian of Norwich at Norwich. So he was deeply into Julian, but he had also traveled extensively and had actually been to Japan and done a full Zen retreat, but done a Zen retreat as a Christian, So he said, it's quite difficult at first. You'd be sitting in this zazen, kneeling in this zazen hall, and then there'd be a plane going overhead. And the Zen master would say, don't listen to the plane. And then he would say, don't try not to listen to the plane. And then, anyway, he passed on to me a thing this Zen guy had said to him, which I found incredibly helpful and completely consonant with Christian things. He said, when you're entering into meditation, he said, think of yourself as being on a bridge, looking down at a flowing stream. And down the stream comes all your stuff. It's the stream of your thoughts. And there are ships on it and boats on it, and they're piled with all your stuff. Don't think you have to ignore them. Don't say, by all means, see the boat approaching. Notice the weight it's carrying, whether it's listing to one side or another. See all the stuff as it comes towards you. Let it pass under the bridge. Let the next one come. You can look at it as much as you like, but he says, don't jump off the bridge onto the ship. Stay on the bridge. And I found that incredibly helpful. In fact, I often do a lot of my still standing where I'm fortunate to walk in places where I can stand on bridges with streams going underneath them. And I find that metaphor of the bridge incredibly helpful to stand still on the bridge and let it go. Because I used to think I had to ignore the stream and ignore the ships on the stream, and you can't do that. But you cannot jump onto them. You cannot get carried away by the stream of thought. You can simply let it flow through you as you stand in this still place on the bridge.
I love that. That reminds me of an image. I've been rereading Elizabeth Gouge's Pilgrim's Inn.
I haven't read it,
but there's an image toward the end, and it's an image about forgiveness. Going back to the idea of time, there was a Faulkner quote that said, "The past is not dead, it's not even past." And she gives the image of this stone that's in the middle of a stream, and everything's getting caught, like all the debris, the branches and the pine straw and all these things are getting hung up on this stone, and they're piling up and they're clogging up the stream. And then there's this moment of forgiveness where this stone is removed and everything is dislodged and it can flow on. And now this person, as she puts it, this person can become who they really are now.
Yeah.
And I feel like that a lot when I try to get still. I just feel like everything is bunching up and getting hung up on all the little obstacles in the water. And it takes me a while. It takes a while to slow down for the Lord to come in and kind of move some things around and dislodge some things. And that can be really frustrating because my expectation is, this should be happening quicker. This should be happening. But it really learning to wait for that.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw just recently in the last day, this extraordinary power cut that came out of nowhere and afflicted the whole of Spain and Portugal and some parts of France, right? Literally everything, some cascade thing happened. And at a certain point in the day, everything was turned off. I mean, it was chaos in the sense that trains couldn't go, traffic lights stopped working, card transactions, petrol stations, everything, literally everything went off. And obviously it was complete panic. And obviously all the people for whom it had gone off didn't know if it was just a local thing because they had no access to sources of news or information. But there have been a few, obviously people are all telling their stories now because the power's back on. But a few people are saying that they found it strangely liberating. That they were completely helpless. Like there was absolutely no way they could keep the appointment. And there was no way that they could tell the people why they couldn't keep the appointment. There was no way they could know whether the people with whom they weren't keeping the appointment also couldn't keep the appointment.
Mm-hmm.
So they were completely helpless. And they were restored for a moment to the condition that most of humanity has been in most of the time, which is not being constantly in touch with everybody and knowing what time it is.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I'm not saying we should all have power cuts like that all the time, but I think it was quite salutary.
Right.
Brian, I don't want to interrupt you if you're about to say something, but there was one more idea I wanted to bring up and ask you about, Malcolm, and ask you also, Brian. I was listening to Ken Myers on Mars Hill Audio Journal this morning, and he was talking about Arvo Pärt, the composer.
Oh, yeah.
And he was interviewing a guy who had apparently made a graphic novel biography of Arvo Pärt.
That's weird.
But one of the things they talked about, I haven't seen it yet. This is news to me, but it sounds amazing. And he was interviewing that guy, and they were talking about Arvo Pärt's idea of the silences, of leaving these silences in the music. And this idea that sometimes God is silent, and that's very frustrating. Because, maybe that silence is uncomfortable, or it leaves all this room for things to pop up in my head that I don't want to think about. But the way he put it really was helpful to me because he said, it's like any good conversation. God is leaving room for us to participate. He's creating a space in the conversation so that we can enter into it. Because he was saying that's Arvo Pärt's idea, is that he wants to make music, but leave enough room between notes so that the imagination of the listener can actually enter into the music.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And then the visual artist was saying there's a visual analog with, if you're drawing panels like in a comic book, that a lot of action happens between the panels. You have a stance, and then you have something has changed by the time you get to this next panel. And it was actually in between those images, in the silence, that something took place. The story has moved forward, and the characters
that's very interesting,
have developed. And so I was thinking about that frustration of God's silence, but how God is all. And I've also been reading Pope Benedict's Jesus of Nazareth, the first of those. And there's this undercurrent constantly of union. And one of that God is drawing us up into participation in the life of the Trinity. But one way he does that is by this hospitable conversation.
That's very good. The thing about silence, again, going back to your great poet, Wendell Berry, he's got a poem called How to Be a Poet, brackets, to remind myself, which I have pinned up in my little writing hut. I sometimes never get past the third line. So the first three lines are, make a place to sit down. Sit down. Be quiet. But the poem goes on to say, accept what comes from the silence. Make the best you can of it. Try to make a poem which does not obscure the silence from which it came.
Yeah. Pieper talks about that too, about music and silence, that essay in Only the Lover Sings.
As perhaps a last turn to our conversation, I'd love for us to talk a little bit about how this object and the habits we build around it can push us toward this, not only as a distinctive thing, but as a case study. Because when I was growing up, I mean, the Christianity as I encountered it was very Gnostic. It was very you sort of step away from the world in order to, you close your eyes to pray. If you love something, it's probably bad. It's probably going to make it into an idol. And there are very legitimate concerns and fears in all of that led to all of those things. However, pipe smoking, this object for me, for starters, it was in my own story was a vehicle for healing when I first encountered it. But it's also an object, and it has an activity around it that allows us to not only enter into stillness, but practice stillness. So I have my own anecdotes on that, but I want to hear each of yours. How does the pipe and the art of pipe smoking help you to practice stillness?
Well, there's a paradox here, I think. There's a particular thing about pipes and pipe smoking. You're really smoking your pipe in order to do nothing, in order to have that stillness. That's the aim. But in fact, you are doing something, but it's something very outward and simple. You have to take the pipe off the rack, you fill the pipe, you quite often, as you probably saw with me, relighting it. And this is actually taking all the energy of distraction that might otherwise just be in circulating dumb thoughts about yourself or whatever. It's actually in this. It's the equivalent for us of what telling beads was in prayer. And it gives the monkey mind something to do. Well, if you like, the Christ mind can finally surface and be its thing. I mean, I'd see if I can just find out a phrase in the when I wrote this essay for the Square Halos Ordinary Saints book. I have this sentence where I say, so when I smoke my pipe, I am active to that degree. I am admittedly doing something, but I'm only active in order to be passive. I do these little things in order at last to do nothing. And then surprisingly, and by sheer grace, in that mellow, smoky space, something of beauty is born, something for which there would have been no room if the pipe had not commanded me to relax.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
How about you, Matthew?
Well, it made me think of a couple of things. One, I'm a fan of Esther Lightcap Meek, and she's a Christian epistemologist that I've gotten to know.
She's really good. I had a conversation with her in the Eagle in St. Bennet Street in Cambridge.
She's wonderful. I really love her.
She's really good, yeah.
But she talks a lot about the thingness of things.
Yeah.
And so there's something about I can feel this thing in my hand. It's really here. And in some sense, it's reminding me that I'm really here too. I can get so lost in my head. And another Ken Myers things. We're not just brains on sticks. We're God has bodied forth some part of his imagination in us even. Yeah. And there's something ratifying about that. There's something that says an amen to the goodness of the things that God has made. And that's another part of Pieper's work is like he says, one of my favorite parts is you can't tell somebody happy birthday and mean it if you agree with Sartre that existence is absurd. He said, but if you really agree with what's going on at the center of things, that God has said, I like this stuff. I like this world that I made. This is my dream and it's coming true and I love it. Then I can I can feel the warmth of this pipe in my palm, and I can smoke it, and I can enjoy letting it drift out. And even that can become this way of agreeing with God about what he has said is good.
Yeah, I think entering into the Sabbath is entering into God's looking at the world and seeing that it's good. It's about letting go of our partial judgments, and just seeing that God sees all these things, including us, that he is at this moment contemplating us. I mean, it's hard to believe, but he's contemplating us with pleasure. Of course he sees the sin and he knows how to deal with it. He sees the completed person. He sees the idea he had, and he sees the idea he had becoming itself through time being another idea that he had.
Yeah, and so getting to enter into that mutuality. If he is contemplating and enjoying us, well, maybe I can participate in this incredible world that he's made, and say, well, Lord, I'll enjoy you back. I'll enjoy you in return.
That's exactly right.
And this is a way to do that. Just one little way, simple way.
I'll enjoy you back is a good phrase. I think there could be a song in there, Matthew.
Well, I'll work on that. Maybe we can work on it in Belfast.
There you go. Yeah. The other thing, I find that life as I know it, the busyness, the pace, the hamster wheel, however you want to conceptualize it, tends to scatter me. I go through a lot of days feeling, like Bilbo Baggins put it, like butter scraped over too much bread. And this little fellow who's older than I am, tends to force me to recollect myself in both senses of that word. I have to be fully present to the pipe. But what typically happens is shortly thereafter, I am then fully present to whatever the silence brings. And sometimes it's just looking up and seeing my kids running through the yard laughing, and I'm able to just fully enter into my delight in their laughter. But we've also all seen it in social contexts. Oh yes, let's get together with a few other guys and smoke our pipes for an hour. And next thing you know, it's been 4 hours and everyone is saying things they wouldn't have said before the pipe smoking, or wouldn't even have said 1 hour into the pipe smoking. Right. But all of a sudden vulnerability is happening and connection is happening, and because they're all fully present to each other.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I want to be respectful of your time, because that is a thing that we have to do in the world that we occupy, even in the face of everything that we have just been talking about. But thank you both for joining me for this conversation. I appreciate both of you sharing your wisdom, and I thoroughly enjoy doing a podcast where I get to mostly listen and where it's well worth doing so. The Imagination Redeemed podcast is a production of the Anselm Society. It's easy to see this world as disenchanted and to give up hope that there's more, but you were made to see the world with the eyes of heaven and to live a bountiful life that participates in the life of God, like in the great stories. The Anselm Society is a place where you can come in and experience that beauty, joyful celebration, and ancient wisdom, and go out renewed, bringing that life to your vocation, home, and church. Join us next time as we pursue a renaissance of the Christian imagination together.